Everyone hits a bump in the road. What do you do with it? Be inspired as we explore the ways people experience, navigate, and manage the ups and downs and twists and turns in this road trip called life. Welcome to another episode of Bump in the Road. The basic podcast is always free. We also have a premium subscription called Bump 2 that lets you listen in on extended behind-the-scenes conversations with our guests. Check it out at www.bumpintheroad.us. Silas Peterson owns an executive recruiting company in Santa Fe, but his passion is the outdoors. Bastille Day 2014, Silas was hiking in the Grand Tetons. The slopes are steep and snowfields are common even in the summer months. On this particular day, Silas was leading the way across a snowfield that blocked the mountainside. What happened next solidified his sense of peace with whatever life might bring. Silas, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Sure. Thanks, Pat. And thanks for giving me the opportunity to do so. It's so July 14th, 2014, Bastille Day, French Independence Day. I was on the sixth day of a backcountry backpacking trip in the Grand Tetons. We were sort of back and forth over the border of the national park over the course of that trip. And I think it had been an exceptionally wet winter, so there was still a lot of snow in the backcountry. We had camped on snow a couple of nights, and this was going to be the last day of our trip, and we were hiking out. And at that point in a backpacking trip where you're fantasizing about the meal you're going to have when you get out, and the 2 pounds of Jelly Bellies that I had on the back seat of the car waiting for me, and all of that. And it was late morning. We were up high. For anyone that knows the park, we were at a place called Paintbrush Divide. So it's up about 8 miles up from Jenny Lake Ranger Station, up the canyon. And we were at, I'm not sure the exact elevation, but I think about 10,000 feet, between 10 and 11,000 feet. And it was going to be just a, sort of quick 8-mile hike down canyon from there. And the trail crossed a snowfield up high, like right below a ridge. And the trail just, dead-ended into the snowfield on a very steep slope. But we had crossed, lots of snow before, didn't think all that much about it. And of course, now in retrospect, there's plenty of opportunity to look back and see what we could have done differently. But we started across this probably, 50 or 100-yard stretch of snow to get to where the single track dirt trail continued on the other side of the snowfield. And just a couple of steps in, my feet started to slide a little bit, and I had an ice axe that I was using, in my hand, and I dug it into the snow to try and get a little purchase. And then my feet slipped entirely, and I fell and hit my chest, and the first thought was, oh no, this isn't going to be good. And I wound up sliding very fast. I mean, it was probably, 55, 60 degree slope. It was very steep, hard packed snow and ice, and the toe of my boot stuck, which I was trying to scramble to arrest my slide. They stuck. I started tumbling head over heels backwards. I don't remember much of this, but my friend Joe, who was with me at the time, has sort of, described the fall as I tumbled head over heels about 150 feet before I hit face first into a boulder. I bounced off of that, hit something else, and then sort of tumbled down a scree field where I came to rest. And I was, of course, completely unconscious. I don't have any memory of the fall itself, but I was apparently there for about 20 minutes before a group of guys who had witnessed the fall down below. They had actually been looking up at this mountainside. They were hiking the opposite direction as us, and they were looking to see how we were going to manage to get down this slope. And so they witnessed the whole fall, and they moved pretty quickly to get up to me, and got there as I was laying on my back. So I was laying there in pretty bad shape. And I guess before they got there, I was sort of in a brownout consciousness of sorts. I was in and out of consciousness. The neatest part of the experience was at some point lying there, I really didn't know if I was going to live or die. And I don't have any idea how close I actually was to dying, but I didn't know. I had, afterwards I found out that I'd broken all the bones in my face, and some other ribs in my scapula, and the whole half of my face was just basically lifted off. It was pretty grisly, apparently, to look at. But laying there, I was in and out of consciousness and had this realization that I didn't know if I was going to live or if I was going to die. And I don't know if it's a classical near-death experience, but it was my near-death experience. And the thought that came to me was, I don't know if I'm coming or going. I don't know if I'm going to survive this. And I'm totally at peace. If this is death, if it's my time to go, like I'm okay with it. I'm ready to leave. But then I thought of my sweetheart, Abby, and my daughter, Calla, who was then 5. And I said, if I have the choice to stick around and, be with them and, see Calla grow up and be with my beloved, that's what I'd like to do. And it wasn't a prayer exactly, but it was this, just thought. And, and then out of consciousness again, this group of guys arrived and apparently covered up my face with something, and they were sort of cradling me. And what was neat and really fortunate for me, 2 of them were actually trained as lifeguards. So they had some emergency first responder, some formal training. And meanwhile, my buddy Joe, who had witnessed the fall and was up on the ridge above, had been able to get some cell service to reach the Jenny Lake Ranger Station, who was able to call in search and rescue for an air ambulance, life flight helicopter. So these guys were talking to me as I was in and out of consciousness. The neat thing is, under the influence of like all of those hormones and whatever happens when the body suffers that kind of trauma, I was cracking jokes and they were cracking jokes back. It was really sort of kind of a lighthearted experience. I was aware of the fact that I couldn't be too pretty to look at, given the circumstances. And so it was only, an hour and a half or so after the fall, maybe even less than that, that a helicopter arrived. 2 guys rappelled out of it. Search and rescue guys, very experienced. The Grand Tetons experience, there's a lot of backcountry activity, a lot of extreme sports stuff. So they have a lot of experience. These guys prepared a basket lift and got me into it, and then called the helicopter back, apparently, connected a cable to the basket lift, and one of them rode up in the cable with me. And I remember one of the guys warning me that it was going to feel very tight when he cinched down to, of course, make sure that I didn't fall out of this basket. He said, this is going to feel a little tight. And I remember he cinched it up, and I said out loud, oh my God, it's too tight. It's too tight. It's too tight. And then the helicopter took off, and all of a sudden I was just swinging through the air. And I said, oh my God, it's too loose. It's too loose. Terrified I was going to fall out. And again, in and out of consciousness. I don't remember the short flight down to Jenny Lake Ranger Station. And then there was actually a helicopter from Eastern Idaho Regional Medical Center, which is in Idaho Falls, just the other side of the Tetons. It's, as the crow flies, it's only about 40 miles away. And that met me and took me to the hospital. I had about an 8-hour emergency surgery, facial reconstruction surgery that thankfully was mostly done inside of my mouth. They were able to reach everything. And so I had, I don't know, like 300 stitches and 21 plates to restructure the bones and put everything back together. And then my jaw was wired shut. But I woke up the next morning in ICU or post-op or whatever. And my, eyes were swollen shut, but that was for all intents and purposes, a successful surgery. And there was a couple of days after that where, and I wasn't too privy to this information, but there's some concern when that much of the body gets exposed to dirt that there could be infections. You could contract infections that could prove, deadly. So there was some concern in the first couple of days. That didn't happen. And so I woke up in the morning, and I believe when I regained consciousness, my mom and my sister, who live in Oregon, were already there, had already flown from Portland across to Idaho. I mean, this is only like 16 hours after the surgery. And my sweetheart, Abby, was on her way to the hospital already. And so, and my dad was also on his way following. He was driving out from Oregon. So, and that began, after that, it was 10 days in the hospital and reports back and forth, between Idaho and Santa Fe, where people had heard about the accident. In fact, there was some rumor, I think, that people thought that I had died. And so there was, that information going back and forth. But the experience that I had sort of in the hospital and recovering was very much, I sort of imagine it was similar to getting to be present at your own funeral, because it was this, getting to see how much I meant to, to people in my community, and to hear reports back from Santa Fe, all the people in the various associations and whatnot that I'm a part of that sent good energy and their wishes for well-being, and a lot of gratitude, expressed about the fact that I had survived this accident and stuff. And so, that's it in a nutshell. And then it was, sort of long, although not terribly long, recovery process from there. I mean, about 40 days after that, the wires were removed from my jaw, and and then I had a number of aesthetic surgeries on my eye, which to try and repair like some damage that was caused by scar tissue. But they were simply aesthetic, because it still to this day droops a little bit. In fact, you can see it. I know you're listeners can't, but droops a little bit, and they did the best that they could. But outside of that, there was just that one major surgery and then some surgeries on restorative surgeries for jaw and teeth and those aesthetic things on my eye. So
that's incredible. I mean, it's amazing that you walked away with serious injuries, but you survived.
Well, I didn't
that.
walk away.
Well, flew away.
Yeah, was flown away. Yeah. But I feel really. I mean, I'm very fortunate. Clearly, very lucky, and in fact, ironically, the surgeon and the doctors said that I'm fortunate that I hit face first, because really any other part of the skull is incapable, like can't withstand that kind of trauma, whereas the face, sort of like an automobile that's designed to crush upon impact and absorb that force. That's essentially what happened when I struck, and my face got all messed up, but it absorbed some of the impact. And so the impact on my brain was less. Some people, might argue a little bit differently, but I'm mostly all there.
What sort of long-term implications came out of this?
Well, so, I mean, it's hard to say clearly sort of what so there are sort of various stages or various periods of the recovery process. And in the first 10 days or so in the hospital, I was just filled with this overwhelming gratitude. I mean, it was like being truly reborn, a new lease on life. Like, I'm on borrowed time now. Like, I shouldn't even be here and have this opportunity to spend time with my family. That kind of experience, the way that lots of different traumatic, life-changing experiences have a way of just focusing your vision or your perspective on what really matters. And so what really mattered was my family was there. Abby was there. My daughter was at home with her mom, waiting for me. And I had a chance to be with them, and sort of all the stresses and anxieties of normal life fell away for a little while. Now, a friend I was talking to just a couple of weeks ago, I was telling him about, the fact I was going to get to tell my story and be a guest on this podcast. And he brought my attention to an interview that was done with George Saunders, who's one of my favorite fiction writers. But he told a story about an experience he had in a plane flight where the engines died and smoke was coming out of the air in the plane. I mean, the cabin was filling up with smoke, and everybody really thought the plane was going to go down. And they managed to land, but he said for 3 or 4 days, it was this, gratitude, overwhelming, oh wow, richness of life, where you can really just, it's that focus that's just, gosh, none of the stuff I used to think matters does matter, because only the truly important stuff does. And he acknowledged just the way that I came to experience it, that, life comes back. I wound up with a $46,000 insurance bill for Blue Cross Blue Shield that didn't want to cover the air ambulance ride, because, you're supposed to take wheeled ambulances, which of course was ridiculous under those circumstances. But, and, that kind of real life returned. And nevertheless, I mean, I still do get to hang on to that experience of lying on the scree, the side of that mountain, and knowing, and I do carry this today, like knowing that death is not, it's not a scary thing. Like, I'm comfortable when it's time to go. I'm comfortable that, that's going to be an adventure that I hope I'm present for. Death isn't scary. Pain is scary. Like, I'll acknowledge that. Nobody wants to die in pain, but I don't think, I'm not afraid of, the event itself. But yeah, life goes on, for better and for worse. All the good stuff of life thankfully goes on, but so does the more challenging stuff of everyday life. So that was sort of the immediate reprieve, or sort of the joy that came out of the experience, and the full readiness to do whatever it took to become myself again. And related to that was then, so I got home to Santa Fe on, around the 25th of July. It was, 10 or 11 days after the accident. And I read Christopher McDougall's Born to Run, which is a wonderful book. A lot of people, it sold a couple million copies, so a lot of people are familiar with it, but it sort of launched the barefoot running movement, raised awareness of the Tarahumara Native runners in Mexico that run very, very long distances, and sort of introduced a lot of people to ultra marathons. And an ultra marathon, for those that don't know, is just anything in excess of 26.2 miles. So it's 50-kilometer races, 31.1 miles, 50-mile races, 100-kilometer races, 100-mile races, and there are even races 200 and 240 miles, and then stage races that go over a week, these kinds of things. I read that book, and I hadn't been much of a runner before I was backpacking. I did a little bit, a couple of miles, a couple of times a week sometimes, mostly supplementing weight training at the gym kind of stuff. I read that book and decided I was going to run a 100-miler. I had that experience probably on painkillers. I was still on some pretty intense medication. But in my head, I had almost done it. It was as certain as anything. And so I was not 2 weeks out of the hospital, and I started running very slow jogs on the river trail in Santa Fe, dreaming of, running a 100-miler. And so I was out there, really every day running a mile out and back. So 2 to 4 miles, really very slow, 13, 14-minute miles, lots of walking, barely moving forward. Getting passed by moms and baby strollers, that kind of experience. But in my head, I was going to do this, ultra marathon thing. And that I did. During I just continued to run and continued to, sort of have that focus, and it kind of provided a motivation to help with the recovery stuff and to keep my mind on physical rehabilitation, getting my body and stuff back. And it's not that, I did a bunch of soft tissue damage, but I broke no long bones. So I was capable of running. I didn't break arms, legs, anything. So I was able to, do that slow jogging right away. And anyhow, that I ran my first marathon that October, a trail marathon. The following week, the week after that, first weekend in November, I ran my first 50K. The following spring, I ran a 50-miler here in Jemez. And the following December, so less than a year and a half after that accident, I completed my first 100-miler out in Texas. And it was, it felt great to be that much back in my body and to have that capability and, and to be healthy enough to do that again. And I gotta say, like from having, I continue to run a lot now, and this summer, if all goes right, I'll run the Leadville 100-miler in Leadville, Colorado in August. But I have taken some time off since then, and running has been such an important part of my mental well-being since then. So it's a mistake for me to try and go without it now. And it was an important part, I think, of that recovery. I should also say that I have been, I'm a sober alcoholic, have been sober since 2002. And when that accident happened, I had I was on some pretty, strong narcotic pain relievers, as I ought to have been, but that can be a very slippery slope for sober alcoholics, because a lot of people wind up with surgery and then being prescribed and legitimately taking pain relievers and then not being able to, it precipitates a relapse. And so I think running helped with that whole experience, like being able to taper off the pain relievers at the appropriate time, and, with the help of people that care about me and doctors and whatnot. But, thankfully that didn't happen, though it could have very easily happened that I'd relapsed or something. So
have you gone back to any sort of mountaineering of any sort, or, extreme hiking?
So maybe a little bit. I mean, not extreme hiking. So it's all relative, right? I mean, what I consider sort of extreme for lots of mountaineers would be absolutely nothing at all. And of course, the stuff that I do for a lot of people would, they would say, oh my gosh, and do like express, shock at the running that I do. Or like last summer, I went on a really memorable, just solo, fast packing trip is what they call it. It's basically a light backpack that allows you to do some running in addition to fast hiking or power hiking. And just in the Pecos Wilderness, which just right outside of town here in Santa Fe, we have one of the most extraordinary stretches of national forest in, I think, the National Forest System. I mean, it's really incredible. And I summited all the Truchas peaks while I was there, which they're a little bit hairy. I mean, it's more than, requires a little bit of hand climbing and stuff, but doesn't require being roped up or anything. And so not for all hikers, but certainly, not intimidating by mountaineering standards at all. And so I continue to do mountain runs and that kind of, I often say that I enjoy being in the mountains. I don't have to be on the mountains. Some people want to bag peaks all day long, and that's not necessarily me, although I do like to spend time in the mountains. And tagging a peak is great fun now and then, but it's not important to me. That's not my mission when I go out into the wilderness areas.
If you could distill this down into a few words of wisdom to pass along, what would you say to somebody?
I mean, something to the effect of, it's all going to be okay. Like in the end, it's all going to be okay. And in fact, it's all okay right now. Like sort of this idea that can't I see that everything is already perfect just as it is? Like that's a truth that that is always with me, whether or not I actually feel it and experience it in the moment. I mean, that's relatively rare that I get to do that, but it's a truth that I really have there. I mean, that experience of feeling it, and whatever caused it. I mean, if it was just brain chemistry stuff that released a bunch of, like brain chemicals to let me know not to panic when I was laying on that mountain and didn't know if I was coming or going, that peace that I felt at exiting, if it was my time to go, like that certainty that everything's going to be okay stays with me. And so I know that everything's going to be okay. I have no idea what that mystery is or what's coming, or if there'll be anything like consciousness of this experience, going with me when I'm gone. But it would just be, everything's going to be okay. And in fact, it's already okay.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope you found something in today's podcast that inspires you along your own life's path, because sometimes a bump in the road is actually a portal into a more conscious and meaningful life. You can subscribe to our free podcast at www.bumpintheroad.us or become a premium member to hear the full conversation. Just go to www.bumpintheroad.us for more information and to sign up.